Hey, I'm Cheryl Casper. Welcome back to Opal Earth. We're in the process of a series on working with the Pixie. In our last Opal Earth video, we coated one of our Nova wheels that had gotten very worn, and we did it ourselves using silicon carbide grit, or you could have used diamond grit, and 2-part epoxy in this case. When we were done with that, we had some leftover material right here because we didn't want to just put all of the grit on the wheel, or it might have gotten too thick to go in our Pixie or Genie. So we took that leftover grit and we made some bits for ourselves. Now these bits are what I was able to make out of what was left over. And once that material gets to where we can ball it, just like that, it's in the drying process, it's now just the perfect consistency for us to make little roly-polies. Now, you might think that this is crazy and messy and everything else, but I use these bits in my micromotor, just like that, and I tighten it down. So I'm going to take this little ball. I know it's messy, right? I'm sorry. I'm going to take this little roly-poly ball and turn it into a 3/32 drill bit using the leftovers. I really hate to throw away grit, especially when it's already got the 330 epoxy in it and it's almost perfect to use. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make these bits. Sound like a good idea? You ready? Let's get started pretty quickly, okay? So at first I just didn't want to waste my grit, but now that I know that I can use this in my micromotor, I can solve a problem. So let me tell you about that problem first before we start making these, and show you some variation of the things that I've created, and it might give you some ideas about creative ways that you might be able to use different shapes to solve some of your problems and needs. I really like to use the micromotor as opposed to the Dremel or a Fordham because of the quietness and the precision that it gives me in carving my opals. But this is limited to a 3/32 bit. I've tried to get some other collets for it, but I just can't seem to find the ones that work. I've got a few adapters and some things like that, but they create extra length and they're just not quite as good. So I really am kind of limited by choice to a 3/32 bit. In my machine, my carving machine, what I found is that I didn't have access to bits that were very small, that had specific grit sizes to them. Nova creates bits for carving that are extremely good. They come in a variety of grits, just like their wheels. They're really wonderful for smoothing medium-sized areas on a carving. However, if I'm trying to get into a very small, specific area of a carving, I need small bits, and I need bits that are custom to get into those little areas, like wheels and things like that. So what I've learned here is that I can make these small points, and you see some of them over here in my collection that I've made in varying grits, from coarse all the way up through, and then I have another one that goes from 400 up to 1200. So I've got bits specifically that fit in, or on sticks where the stick itself fits in, and that gives me flexibility to make these larger if I'd like a better smoothing space. I can also use things like a little tube, and you might find all sorts of things that you could use. This was a very small seed bead holder, and it was about this long, and I cut it down so that I could put the lid on here, and I will end up taking a used bit with grit in here and puncturing that through the top, which we can see later. I've made bits out of balsa wood like these so that my bit is not solid, grit, but instead is laying on something larger. And this allows me to have broader shapes and different shapes. I use it with solidified grit with 330 epoxy adhered to it. I use it for polishing, I use it for ZAM, I use it for all sorts of things. So balsa wood bits. We can even make little round discs like that one. I can put it onto a screw mandrel just like this, balance it out, and use it just as I would a wheel mandrel. And as it wears down, it becomes very functional for a smaller application as well. So there's quite a bit of flexibility, and I'm sure that you can come up with some more examples of different ways to make bits that would fit your own specific needs. I want to make sure to clean my workspace so that I don't contaminate my next grit with any of the grit that I've used before. It will get all over your hands and all over the table and all in the towel. So make sure that you clean your workspace extremely well before you start. Good. Now this process is extremely messy, and you don't want to hurt your hands or any objects on your hands. So you might want to coat your fingers with Vaseline to help keep the mixture from sticking to your fingers. You also might want some acetone or fingernail polish remover to help you remove the mixture as it gets on your hands, along with a towel. Remove your jewelry to keep them from getting messed up. So for this process, I'm going to need grit to start with, and this grit is about a 325 grit, and it's a diamond. It might be a synthetic diamond, but it is a diamond, and it's pretty aggressive, and I really like this for getting in to smooth out areas and to get some problem areas out of my carving. And right now I've got between a half a teaspoon and a teaspoon, and I want just a little bit more than I have parts of this, which I'm going to use a half a teaspoon here of my resin and a half a teaspoon here of my hardener, and a little more than half a teaspoon, somewhere between half a teaspoon and a full teaspoon in my mixture, because I don't want it to be as thin as it was when we put it on the wheel. I want it to harden a little bit quicker, and I want it to be a little more dense. So that's my 330 epoxy. My grit, I'm going to need a cup to mix my epoxy, and a stirring stick, and then I'm also going to need things that I'm going to put my grit on, such as sticks. I will make some of them where I just, roll them out like we saw earlier, but I will also put some of them on sticks. Try using a syringe and see how well that works. We might also try to see if we can make one of these barrels out of that. So I've got that prepared, and it's got a little bit of oil in it to keep it from sticking so badly, and I've got some leftover bits here that are worn out, but they're still straight. I don't want to use anything that's going to be crooked, but they're worn out, and I can use it to put just like that into one of my barrel bits. So that's the material that I'm going to use. So this is just the mixing of the epoxy. 2-part epoxy in this case. 330 epoxy is what I recommend. Pour your grit into your mixture that you've just mixed up of resin and hardener, and mix it well. Keep stirring the mixture for approximately 2 minutes to make sure that everything is mixed well. as you can imagine, rolling this out into little snake-like shapes will be better served if we wait for it to harden just a little bit. So in the meantime, I'm going to make some discs, and those discs, remember, look like this. We can drill a hole in that and put it into a screw-type mandrel such as this. And now, believe it or not, I'm simply going to pour my mixture onto my plastic surface. My plastic surface is very, very thick plastic. You can put as much on there as you think you need as it spreads out, and they'll flatten out a little bit on their own. Going to roll some onto a stick like this. No air bubbles down in there. When you have an air bubble in there, it actually causes it to address your stone with a bump, like here, where there's a little hole. You see that air bubble right there? Can you see that little air bubble right there? That would cause it to hit the stone a little bit differently. So before I use this, I would need to grind that down. So, but it should be just about as simple as putting that back on and then pressing this into place very straight, but not all the way down, because you don't want the tip of it. If the tip goes all the way to the bottom, then as soon as you start using this wheel, then your metal is going to start hitting the stone very soon, and you're going to have a very shallow kind of bit. So I suggest that you let the tip be somewhere in here. And again, you might want to come back and straighten that. Certainly, you could have filled the entire cylinder up if you had wanted to. It just depends on how much grit you have and how big you want your bit to be. Try to get our bit as straight as we can in there. You see, these are coming along nicely, aren't they? They're starting to round out very nicely. This one is going to get a little lump right there where it's been flattened. So occasionally we want to come back to our bits and just very easily roll them out so that they don't get lumpy. Now, what commonly happens here, you see it kind of keep rolling it out until we get the shape we want. And does that happen? Absolutely. That just kind of keeps going off this way and that way. And you can make whatever shape you like out of that. So I've taken some of the grit, now that it's harder, and I've actually pulled out little pea-sized pellets that I'm going to use to roll out, and I'm going to continue to do that until I've used all the grit that I have in here. These are the most beneficial shapes to me as I carve. You might find another shape is more helpful, but this is what I like to make the most of. I like to use a 3/32 bit right next to what I'm rolling so that I can roll them together. And that helps the bit that I'm rolling to become exactly 3/32. And it's about the same size. I also like to make one end slightly tapered, just so I can put it into the bit just in case. As I work them, I just simply put them off to the side and make sure that they're straight. Oh, see how difficult it is to get that straight again? There we go. Now, I'm going to come back and check this. See, I've got a flat spot in the meantime. So I'm keeping an eye on these elements as I'm working. These are looking pretty round. Okay, good. You can see that I have scraped as much as I possibly could out of this cup, because when I'm using diamond grit with the expense that it has, I want to make sure I can get as much as I can for my money with my bits. And I really like this. Now see, I just knocked this over, didn't I? So I'm going to have to straighten that back up. And it's starting to get a little tenacious here, a little firm in my hand, so that I know it's starting to set pretty well. So I want to make sure that I go ahead and get the rest of my material as worked as soon as I can. Once it starts springing back into the place that it was in, then I have waited too long. So even if I'm not doing it perfectly at the moment, I want to get as close to this snake shape as I can. You still need to move these around periodically just to make sure that they haven't bowed or created a flat spot as you've been working. So keep working. I've gotten really used to the size of a 3/32 bit. So most of mine are right at that diameter in the shaft so that I can use it. But if you're not comfortable with that, please make sure that you use a metal piece. It helps you to adapt to the right size. Are you surprised with how many pieces we've gotten so far out of our little mixture? So again, that was 1/2 teaspoon of resin, 1/2 teaspoon of hardener, and about 3/4 of a teaspoon of grit. Roll out that flat spot again. Good. It helps to see it this way, doesn't it? We've made quite a bit. Now, I'll wait for 24 hours for these to harden. Even though they may feel like they're hard, you just want to make sure that they've had a chance to set up and achieve its maximum hardness before you go using them. In very rare circumstances, you'll find after 24 hours that they're still flexible. For some reason, perhaps it was the humidity or the altitude or a slight variation in the amount of hardener you put in, or perhaps even the hardener was old, the bits won't set up correctly. After 24 hours, you'll come back and you'll find that they're still slightly flexible. And there's really nothing that you can do about those. You can try to use them, but just make sure that they don't break off as you're using them and get embedded into your handpiece. You can tell this will have to be balanced because it's probably a little bit off balance right now. So when I turn it on and it spins, it will be a little imbalanced. Even though this piece might look like it's fairly balanced, when you turn the micromotor on, you can notice how out of balance it is. It happens to have a flat spot on it where it dried on the surface of the table and has created a problem with rotation. So when you turn that on, if you were to turn that on fast in your machine, it would actually break off and fly across the room, which creates a safety problem. So be very careful until you have, you can even see vibration in there caused by that imbalance. And even though you might think that this is balanced, if you put your finger underneath it, you can certainly feel that vibration. So you'll need to use a file or some other abrasive item in order to smooth this out before you use it on a stone. Always use handmade bits on a very slow setting. This goes for abrasive grit bits that you have made, and also those that you might have made with sandpaper and a split mandrel. Be very, very careful. These can bend or break off and fly across the room and hit someone or put an eye out. Please be very, very careful. As you can see, you can be very flexible with the way that you roll out your grit putty, so to speak, so that you can make the bits that are helpful for you and your carving needs and any other type of needs that you have for cutting special angles and things like that. Having those bits has been a very, very helpful way for me to become much more detailed in my carving and to be able to smooth out areas I otherwise wouldn't have been able to get to. So that's the trick for you today on Opal Earth. I'm Cheryl Casper, an instructor at the William Holland School of Lapidary Arts, teaching opal cutting and carving. Hope you have a great day.